It was supposed to be a regular camping trip, just a group of us, 5 friends, escaping the noise of the city and swapping it for the quiet of the woods. The kind of quiet that's almost too perfect, you know? The kind that makes you realize just how loud your thoughts can get. We'd pitched our tents in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, their branches clawing at the star-streaked sky. The fire we'd built earlier was nothing more than a weak glow by then, struggling to stay alive. The air had that sharp, woodsy bite, the kind that nips at your skin and settles deep into your bones. Someone, probably Jamie, tossed the last piece of firewood on the embers, but it didn't catch. We let it go, figuring we'd call it a night soon. That's when it started. It was faint at first, almost easy to ignore, a soft rustling in the trees like the forest was breathing. I joked it was probably just the wind. No one laughed. Then came the sound, low, stretched out, and distant, almost human, but not quite. Like someone was trying to mimic the way a person speaks, but couldn't quite get it right. "Did you hear that?" Cassie asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. She was clutching her thermos like it was a lifeline. "I didn't hear anything," Jamie said, but the way his eyes darted to the edge of the clearing said otherwise. We all froze when it happened again. A single, clear word breaking through the stillness. "Ben." The voice was soft, almost melodic, and it came from the trees. "Very funny," Ben said, nudging me with his elbow. "You think that's going to scare me?" "Not me," I shot back. "Pretty sure that's your problem, man." But the unease settled in fast. Something about that voice wasn't right. It wasn't just the tone, it was the way it sounded, hollow, like it didn't belong here. "Ben." This time it was louder, closer, dripping with something that felt almost like malice. Cassie's thermos hit the ground with a muffled thud. "Okay, seriously, who's messing with us?" "I'm not," I said, and neither was Jamie or Cassie or Lily, who was sitting dead still, her eyes locked on the trees, and Ben was right there, sitting next to me. The fire flared briefly, casting jagged shadows across his face. His jaw was clenched, his hands balled into fists. "This isn't funny anymore," he said, but his voice trembled, betraying him. That's when we all heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching the dry leaves just beyond the firelight. Too heavy to be an animal, too light to be anything comforting. Ben. This time it sounded like it was standing right behind him. My heart was hammering so loud I thought it might drown out everything else. But then Ben turned to me, his face pale as ash. "If you're all here," he whispered, "then who's calling my name?" The fire flickered out completely, plunging us into darkness. That was the first time we heard the Goatman's voice, but it wouldn't be the last. The thing about camping in the middle of nowhere is that it's never as peaceful as people make it out to be. Sure, you get the stars, the fresh air, and all that, but what no one talks about is how loud the silence gets. It's not calming, it's oppressive. You start noticing every little sound, the crackle of a dying campfire, the groan of the trees shifting in the wind, the scuttle of something small darting through the leaves. It gets under your skin. We were deep in the woods that night, too far out for cell service, too far out for help, if we were being honest. The 5 of us, me, Ben, Cassie, Jamie, and Lily, had set up camp in a clearing we found earlier that day. The fire was dying down, and with it went our nerves. That's when we heard it. It wasn't much at first, just the rustling of leaves somewhere behind us. Cassie joked it was raccoons. Jamie said it was probably the wind. I didn't say anything because, honestly, I didn't believe either of them. There wasn't any wind, and the sound was too deliberate, too steady, like something was watching, waiting. Then came the voice, Ben. It was soft, almost a whisper, and it came from the trees. I thought maybe I imagined it until I saw Ben freeze next to me. He heard it too. Very funny, he said, looking around at the rest of us. Who's trying to mess with me? Nobody answered. Lily clutched her blanket a little tighter. Jamie started to say something, but the words caught in his throat when we all heard it again. Ben. This time it was louder, closer. The tone was off, like someone trying to mimic the way a person speaks, but getting it just wrong enough to make your stomach turn. Okay, seriously, who's out there? Ben shouted, standing up and glaring at the woods. His voice cracked just a little, enough to give away that he wasn't as brave as he was pretending to be. That's when we realized something was very wrong. Ben was standing right next to me, clear as day, but that voice calling his name, it was coming from the other side of the clearing. The footsteps started next, slow and heavy, crunching through the dry leaves. We couldn't see anything, but the sound was unmistakable. Something was walking toward us, and it didn't care about being quiet. Ben, the voice called again, dragging out the name like it was tasting it, savoring it. I don't know who screamed first, Cassie maybe, or Lily, but all I could think was that it didn't make sense. Ben was right there, and yet someone or something was calling for him. The fire flickered, almost like it was trying to stay alive long enough to give us one last chance to see what was out there, and for a split second, I thought I saw it. A shape, hunched and wrong, standing just beyond the edge of the light. Then the fire went out completely, and we were left in the dark. That was the first time we heard the Goatman's voice, but it wouldn't be the last. The first night in the cabin felt like a bad idea almost immediately. The fire outside had burned down to embers, and the only light left was the dim glow of an old lantern on the table. We tried to act like everything was fine, telling stupid stories, cracking jokes, but the truth is, none of us could shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It started small, like these things always do, just faint footsteps outside. At first, they were slow, deliberate, crunching over the fallen leaves. Ben muttered something about deer, but no one moved to check. The sound circled the cabin, stopping occasionally, only to start up again a few seconds later. "It's just animals," Jamie finally said, his voice way too loud for the stillness around us. "They probably smell our food or something." "Right," Lily agreed quickly, though she didn't sound convinced. But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept circling, moving closer one moment and farther away the next. At one point, it sounded like whatever it was had come right up to the window. We all froze, waiting, but nothing happened. "Okay, seriously, let's just go to bed," Cassie said, forcing a laugh. "This whole situation screams horror movie. If we die, I at least want some sleep first." We laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was better than admitting we were all terrified. Eventually, the sound stopped, and we convinced ourselves it really had just been animals. The next day wasn't much better. The forest felt different, too quiet, like even the birds and bugs didn't want to be there. We tried to keep busy, gathering wood, exploring the area, but the tension followed us everywhere. Around midday, Jamie stopped in his tracks, staring at something in the distance. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice low and tight. "See what?" Ben asked, following his gaze. There was someone standing right there, by that tree. We all looked, but there was nothing, just the same endless trees. Maybe it was a shadow, Lily said, though she sounded just as uneasy as the rest of us. No, it wasn't a shadow, Jamie insisted. It was a person, I swear. We searched for a while, calling out, but no one answered. And whoever or whatever it was had vanished without a trace. By the second night, we were all on edge. The fire outside burned brighter this time, and we all huddled closer to it like it could protect us from whatever was out there. That's when the voice came back. This time, it was calling for Jamie. Jamie. It whispered from the trees, soft and eerie, just like before. But then another voice, identical, called from the opposite direction. Jamie. We froze. There was no joking, no trying to explain it away this time. The voices were coming from two completely different places at once. "This isn't funny," Jamie shouted, his voice shaking. "No one's laughing," Cassie muttered, her eyes darting between the trees. The footsteps came next, heavier than before, like whatever was out there wanted us to hear it. They circled faster, closing in. "I think we should go inside," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. We scrambled back into the cabin, locking the door behind us, but it didn't feel safe. Not anymore. The skeptic in our group, Ben, tried to keep calm, muttering things like, "It's just a prank," or "Maybe it's echoes." But even he was losing his nerve. The hours dragged on, the cabin filled with the sound of nervous breathing and the occasional nervous laugh. But no one really believed we were okay. Then, just before dawn, we realized someone was missing. "Where's Cassie?" Lily asked, her voice rising in panic. We all looked around, but Cassie wasn't there. Her sleeping bag was empty. We rushed outside, calling her name, but the forest swallowed our voices. That's when we saw it, a jacket hanging from a tree branch. It was hers. The fabric was torn, and dark stains covered it. Stains that looked way too much like blood, and just like that, any shred of denial we had left was gone. We didn't have much of a choice. Leaving Cassie out there alone wasn't an option, no matter how terrifying the woods had become. So, armed with flashlights and sheer desperation, we headed out to find her. The forest felt alive in the worst possible way. Every branch that snapped underfoot sounded like a warning. Every shadow stretched too far, and the air itself seemed heavier, like it didn't want us there. "Cassie!" Lily called out, her voice shaking. No answer. Just the wind, carrying whispers that felt too deliberate, too close. It didn't take long for us to realize something was wrong. The path we'd taken so many times during the day now seemed unfamiliar, twisting and leading us deeper into the trees. It felt intentional, like the forest was steering us, pulling us toward something. That's when we saw it. At first, it was just a shape, tall and broad, standing completely still between the trees. But as we got closer, the details became clear. It was grotesque, like something out of a nightmare. A twisted mix of human and animal, its legs bent unnaturally like a goat's, its face a horrifying blend of sharp features and lifeless eyes. Then it spoke. "Cassie," it said, in a voice that almost sounded like her. Almost. We froze. No one moved. No one breathed. And then it laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was too perfect, too rehearsed, like it was mimicking one of us. And then it spoke again, this time repeating something Ben had said earlier, word for word. "That's not possible," Ben whispered, but the thing just stood there, watching us, its head tilting slightly as if it was studying us, and then it moved. It was fast, too fast. One second, it was standing still, and the next, it was lunging toward us. We scattered, running blindly into the woods, the sound of its hooves pounding the ground behind us. The chase was chaos. The forest seemed to close in, branches clawing at our faces and legs. Every time I thought I'd lost it, I'd hear it again, its heavy breathing, the snapping of twigs, the awful sound of its voice now calling out in each of our voices. At one point, I stumbled into a clearing and tripped over something. When I looked down, my stomach turned. It was a shoe, dirty and torn, but it wasn't Cassie's. Nearby, there were more things. Scraps of clothing, a broken phone, even a backpack. This wasn't the first time it had done this. I didn't have time to process it before I heard Lily scream somewhere to my left. I ran toward the sound, but when I got there, it wasn't Lily. It was the thing. It stood there, its back to me, repeating her scream over and over, like it was practicing. I turned and ran the other way. Eventually, I found Jamie. He was leaning against a tree, breathing hard, his face pale. "Where's Ben?" I asked. "I don't know," he gasped. "It came after me, but—" "Shh," I whispered, cutting him off. There was a sound nearby, footsteps, slow and deliberate. Jamie and I pressed ourselves against the tree, holding our breath. The sound got closer, and then, out of the shadows, Ben appeared, or at least it looked like Ben. "Guys," he said, his voice calm but shaky. "It's me." But something about him felt wrong. His movements were stiff, his eyes darting around like he was trying to figure out what to do next. "Ben?" I said cautiously. "Yeah, it's me," he repeated. Jamie grabbed my arm. "That's not him," he whispered. I didn't want to believe it, but then it smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that didn't belong on Ben's face. "Run," Jamie said, and we did. I don't know how long we ran. The forest felt endless, and the sound of that thing, its voice, its laughter, was everywhere. It was toying with us, keeping us close enough to terrify, but far enough to keep the game going. Finally, I burst out of the trees into a small clearing, and there she was, Cassie. She was sitting on a rock, her head down, her hair hanging in front of her face. "Cassie!" I shouted, running toward her. She looked up slowly, and for a moment, I thought everything would be okay. But then she smiled, and my heart sank. It was the same smile, the same wide, unnatural grin I'd seen on Ben's face. And that's when I realized we were never getting out of these woods. As we stood there, everything that had felt so certain just hours before seemed to fall apart. The forest, the woods we thought we knew so well, had twisted into something unrecognizable. It wasn't just the dark or the silence that followed us. It was the terror that spread between us, like a disease. We'd been friends for years, but now each step felt like a betrayal, as if we didn't know each other anymore. Fear had a way of breaking things down, of making us question everything, even ourselves. The thing in the woods didn't just scare us, it divided us. We couldn't trust what we saw, what we heard, or who we were anymore. And then there was the thing itself. It wasn't just a monster or a creature. It was the unknown, the thing we didn't understand, the thing we couldn't even begin to make sense of. How do you fight something you can't even explain? We were out of our depth. Every moment felt like we were dangling on the edge of a cliff, waiting for something to snap. Looking back, maybe we should have turned back earlier. Maybe we shouldn't have kept pushing, kept trying to uncover what was hiding in the dark. But curiosity, the kind that lures you in when you shouldn't even be looking, had its hold on us. We wanted to know, to understand. But now, I wonder, what's the line between bravery and recklessness? What's the price of curiosity when it takes you too far? And in the end, the forest took everything. The friendships, the trust, the sense of safety we'd once had. All that's left now is the silence, broken only by my own thoughts, wondering if we should have ever stepped foot in those woods